My name is Eddie Mandry, and I am Director for Africa at Yale University, supporting the University President's Africa Initiative with our engagement with governments, centers of academic excellence, figuring out ways to identify the best and the brightest scholars to come to Yale, but also figuring out ways to do what was mentioned in the last panel, which is articulating pathways back for students from Africa who can be part of Africa's transformation. I'm originally from Kenya, so this morning I had a call with my mother. Someone is very upset there. So I'm half Ethiopian, half Kenyan. So not just, I just saw your face, David. So I have a Sunday morning call with my mother every week, and so I called her and said, she asked me what I'm doing this morning, and I said, I'm moderating a conversation with Lord Cairns. And so I think the connection wasn't so good. So as far as she's concerned, this Sunday morning I'm sitting here moderating a conversation with the Lord. So, I don't know if any photos will come out of this. I'll make sure to send them her way. It's a great pleasure and honor to invite, to introduce this morning's speaker here with me. Lord Simon Cairns has had a distinguished career in business, but also in philanthropy. He served in various capacities, chairing boards in investment banking, in insurance, but he's also been the chair of VSO in the United States, in the UK, Voluntary Services Overseas. He's also been involved with the Overseas Development Institute, the Charities Aid Foundation. He's a founding board member of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. He's also on the international board of the Turkana Basin Institute. He's determined on the question of local voices being heard and understood by governments, and he, in that regard, was the co-founder of Africa's Voices, something he'll tell us a little bit more about. But it's my great honor to welcome Lord Simon Cairns to this conversation. So first, just to kick things off, people say philanthropy comes from the Greek word philanthropia, to love humanity. So I'll start off with a question quoting Tina Turner from a 1993 smash hit. What's love got to do with it?
Good question. We could spend the time, I'm sure, on that, and I will come back to it, but I just feel I better start with the problem that your mother had. I remember many years ago when I was in Zimbabwe with VSO, and we had just helped to extend a school, and we had several volunteers working there. And my wife and I happened to be in the area, so we were asked if we would come and open the new area. And it was great fun to arrive at this rather distant school, way out in the bush, to be greeted by a notice put up by the students of this school, which read very nicely, "May Lord Cairns live forever." And underneath it put, "God help Lady Cairns." So that's nothing to do with philanthropy, but except probably for Lady Cairns, who needed all the help she could get in those circumstances. But clearly, we all here know what philanthropy is. We will all have our way of talking about it, but it is that we all have, everyone here has, most people have a sense that they must do things for the betterment of their fellow human beings. And that's a shared, very general ambition, and it's great to see so many people in this room after 2 extremely good days who want to talk more about it. If I may, I'll just go straight on into the lesson that I love to hear that came not only from this morning, but came from the days yesterday when we were discussing the role in civil society of the civil service. And we come back all the time to something that to me is the most important thing and is the basis on which I have founded, firstly as a research project and subsequently as an applied research enterprise. The key issue of feeling that we have to start by asking people what they think and understanding what they really mean. It isn't easy. We find at every level, as somebody who's been involved in philanthropy, particularly in this continent, but not only, we all have the number of occasions where we've seen things that have gone wrong, where things haven't worked. And to some extent, we're right to do things that don't work. We've got to try new things and be brave. But my sense is that on most occasions, a large part of the reasons they don't work is because people haven't taken the trouble to listen to what people want. There are very clever people from all parts of the world who have great views, but they can easily come up with the wrong answers. And the great hope and my great passion at the moment is to try and change the mindset, and I saw signs of it in the conversations we had in the first part of the day, that of the importance of listening first and listening intelligently. I give you another story of a failure. He was kindly saying I work a little bit with Richard Leakey in the Turkana Basin. Now, we go up there from time to time, and I came across a project, a sanitation project, where a very good organization, nice organization, believed the sanitation arrangements were completely non-existent and proceeded to build a whole lot of long drop lavatories, failing to understand that no Turkana will ever defecate in the same place as someone else has. So the maximum use of any long drop was 1. And it's quite difficult to establish whether it has been used or not. So the more likely case was never. And that was just because they hadn't listened. It may be if they'd asked the polite people in Turkana, we're thinking of building long droppers, people would have probably, out of politeness, said yes. It isn't a question of asking, it's a question of listening. And the whole challenge that I would have to every organization, and we're working with UNICEF in Somalia, with Well-Told Stories, in education, in FMCG, in drought, all these different organizations. We don't know anything. We don't know how to solve anything. We don't do anything. What we do is to create conversations, curate conversations, mainly through local language radios. It's all in local languages. But we can do it through Facebook groups, through WhatsApp groups, and various other groups to get people to talk to each other and create conversations between. They can be monitored by people they know in their local languages. We don't participate in that. We extract the data from that, and large amounts of data, and put that to big data people at Cambridge, which is the co-founder of our organization, put it through the linguists so that we can understand the tone of what is being said. And then we put it to the social scientists, who are largely based in Kenya, and I wish we had more of them, because it's difficult to keep really good social scientists, because they're rare, and they tend to move on. But our hope is that we can show everybody who is operating in any organization that it is worth stopping at the beginning to listen to what local people have to say. Now, we can, on the systems we have, also go back at the end and, using very similar methodology, measure the impact of what other people, whoever we're working for, has decided to do, and see what the reactions of the community is to what has happened. So I hope over the few years that are left for me to try and change people's views, to think much more, in much more detailed terms, how you find out what people want. Not necessarily because you're going to accept everything that they want as being realistic and appropriate, but to have the humility to start from that point and then to work on from that point in conversation with them. And we do triangulate all our conversations back so that we aren't just taking raw data. We are cross-checking our data and triangulating it, so that all the clever people who are doing extraordinary things here have at least got in the back of their mind, when they're deciding programs, when they're developing programs, what people have said they wanted and what they really mean when they say that. I don't know, is that
yes,
a
no,
good start?
that is a good, you really set the stage in terms of your primary focus on generating people's opinions, thoughts, and having that information be leveraged to better decision-making in the formulation of programs or initiatives that are to impact the partners or stakeholders. Just kind of looking more deeply at this question of, Rita mentioned how important it is for the information and data to be presented to the partners, the people from whom the data itself is being derived. You did mention that you work with Cambridge University. Cambridge Analytica has been in the news recently in terms of how this data can be mined and used for nefarious purposes in some instances. But I'm curious about the extent to which, some of the work you've done in Kenya, in Somalia, looking at people's perceptions of how their taxes or their local governments are working to address their issues and so on. How is the data and the insights being generated, being presented to the communities themselves? Well,
Working as we do from a university background, we wish to make all the data that we possibly can as transparent and available to people as our partners will allow us to, because we are merely subcontractors to a range of people like yourselves working in who have specific problems that need to be addressed. On the issues of, are we like Cambridge Analytica, which in some ways we find that within the space of, because of regulation, we have to be fairly careful of the use of data, but we can, using Facebook data, which is publicly available, we can work out who are the opinion formers within groups. If you analyze enough conversations, you can find out who is influencing whom. And if you then influence the influencers, then you can influence a lot more people than you would otherwise do. We do this only in the social space. I mean, it's interesting within the FMCG issue as to who are the influencers within various groups. And we find in Somalia completely different approaches in the south of Somalia as we do in northwest state. But we are very careful that we don't go outside that space. And we hope to work not only with the NGO community, with donors and with governments. Now, working with us is quite hard work because it isn't us just telling. It's working in combination through time to build up real pictures of what people want and putting a whole different sort of climate to the listening, and what listening really means, and what are the obstructions, and whether they're real obstructions. And it's for our partners to decide how to deal with them. But to me, it's the humility of listening, and the humility of listening at quite a high level. And it may not be appropriate in every case, but there are a lot of cases where really understanding what people want, it seems to me to be important. When working with government departments, how much do they want the real answers, and how much do they want merely to use our initial findings to validate whatever they want to do? That's quite often a quite hard question to deal with, and we are quite careful in the political sense as to whether we are being used in the way we think is appropriate, as opposed to the way in which other people, other organizations which might be political, but they might be other people who merely want to their validation through the bit of the information that we can give them that happens to suit their purpose.
So you do raise an interesting point that has been recurring through both this weekend and some of the conversation today, is the question of trust. The Mo Ibrahim report from 2017 looks at the issue of trust within African countries. The people Africans trust the most, ranked number 1 in last year's report, religious leaders. Number 2, the military. 3, traditional leaders. At the bottom of the list was political parties, tax officials, and opposition parties. When it comes to this question of trust and building partnerships in philanthropy, what has been your experience? How do you foster a relationship of trust? I know you mentioned the question, the notion of humility and listening as one piece.
I think we are a neutral organization. We don't hold any opinion on anything beyond that people should listen. And what we try to do is to allow our partners to understand who are the people within the societies in which the groups are living and working, as to who they trust. And it's for them to decide how they convince those people, the people, we don't mind whether it's religious leaders or governments, but we can find out who influences, whose trust people at the bottom of the pyramid have. And it is up to the organization that has its own programs to understand how best to use that information in order to become as effective as they would want to be in whatever area, that social area that we're dealing with. Does that make sense?
Fair enough. Yes, that makes sense. It is the people, the organizations and the partners you work with who can derive utility from figuring out who the decision makers, who the key players are in influencing opinion and practice to some degree. What is, in terms of just philanthropy and your trajectory and engagement in philanthropy, what has been your experience, the genesis of your participation in philanthropic causes?
Well, I was extremely lucky as a young man, that's a long time ago, in that my personal tutor when I was at Cambridge was none other than Amartya Sen. It's pure luck. And as far as I'm concerned, he's remained my guru ever since. And every time I see him, I say, when's your next book coming up? Because I need to know what to think for the next 2 years. And through that and other associations, I became involved. I read, obviously, development economics and became, as a quite young man, the treasurer of VSO, and saw, again, in my case, because my wife and I would take holidays by going to go around and live with volunteers for a week or two, which was jolly good fun. But at the same time, you saw what it looked like from the bottom. We might spend a day or two with the ministers or with the agencies at the end, but it would be on the background of having spent a couple of rather uncomfortable but enjoyable weeks that's lying on the floors of the huts of various volunteers in strange and wonderful places. So I guess that whole issue of listening came out of that. My own ideas for the founding of Africa's Voices really started when I did a tour of Nigeria in the late 1970s, when we had two volunteers whose project didn't really exist. So they, off their own bat, and with a local character on the local radio station, set up a radio story program about farming and the dangers of farming and when to sow and when to apply whatever to plant or to reap. And it was a personal story. When I got there, these two kids had got in the local language had got 10,000 letters a week coming in. And the effect that they had, I think, on the development of agriculture in the Hausa areas of northern Nigeria, I think was very considerable. And trying to put that together with what I learnt through being on the board of Celtel, which was the predecessor company of Moe's, and the effect of being involved in that when it was in one country. And by the time we sold the company, 6 years later, we were in 18 countries. And the effect that this had on the populations of all those countries, I mentioned this last night, but when we went into a new country, we would find that the population should have the economic ability for about 1% of the population to have mobile phones on the basis of GDP and all that stuff. Within a year, it was usually 5 times that number who had got mobile phones, whether because the GDP statistics were wrong or whether it was because people were prepared to give up something that they had been using their money for, because the effect of that ability to communicate was so important to people that they were they would forego. I don't know whether it's the odd bottle of beer at the end of the week or something else. But it was quite extraordinary to me as we saw this thing develop, how the use of that technology, which is frankly the basis of the technology that I'm asking all of us to use when tapping into the opinions and thoughts of people. It's all really an extension of one and the same thing.
Interesting story. Thank you for sharing the anecdote from the experience in Nigeria and agriculture. There is, the notion that when people think of philanthropy, all people think about is money. That's just the first thing that comes to mind. Warren Buffett has a quote where he says, it's far easier to make money than to give it away effectively. You've served as treasurer at VSO. You've had quite an impressive background in the financial industry. In terms of effectively giving money away and having measurable, sustainable impact, what are your thoughts on this question?
I think giving away money is extremely difficult. Where do your priorities lie? What are the metrics that you use for that? And how can you best achieve the results? In some cases, one has to ask other people to do it for you. And in other cases, you need to remain closer to the objectives, because you may be sufficiently arrogant to feel that you do know how best to organize the exercise. I'll give you an example. We have done quite a bit of work for Oxfam, mainly in Kenya, and they tell us they actually don't have any money at the moment for various extraneous reasons, but they've said they would not start a program before we had done some basic research on what they thought they ought to do. And it's only then that they will design the programs that they feel is most appropriate. And they will then ask us, after the event, to come back and measure what the perceptions of the success or failure of that is with the community that we originally talked to. So I'm all in favor of people trying out new things, but I think you hope you can try out new things on a pretty controlled and, I'm sure you all do, sensitive way where you actually know what you're trying to achieve and have some way of measuring what that achievement and the effective extra contribution that your involvement may have in it. This is all pretty straightforward, simple stuff, but it's of course much more difficult to carry through. And I think for everyone, whether they involve us or find other ways to do it, that people do think about the extent to which modern technology, the internet, the various forms of social media, there are huge opportunities to do this much more scientifically than just putting something in and hope that it works and come out at the end and say, well, it did to some extent.
Yes. And so innovation, technology, leveraging these new tools that we can use to generate insight about how to design and create programming that impacts the partners, the stakeholders most effectively, I think is an extremely important point. what do you think, last question before I turn it over to the audience for Q&A, what is the role for philanthropists or their entities they represent in advocacy for policy change? Should philanthropists or philanthropies be involved in advocacy?
I think that they are an important part of that force. I would say that within their ability to use their status, and they have status, that to do so from the basis of having done the research work to back up what they're doing so that their case can be far more powerful than merely the knee-jerk reaction to what are important things and important things on which they rightly have views. But to the extent that you can back that up with what we're trying to do is to bring back democracy from the bottom. And it seems to me that the more powerful you can demonstrate that your democracy is, the more likely you are to be able to make the impact on those in government who are making decisions. And to me, that's an absolutely key part of the whole exercise. Does that make sense?
Yes, so the power of informed decision-making, with the way you could leverage that information to shape policy in trying to make those difficult decisions on what to prioritize, where to allocate resources, and so on.
Absolutely. And it's hard work.
Yeah.
It really is hard work. It isn't just going out and asking. It's going out asking and really understanding and following through debates with communities. I mean, we're running weekly radio shows mainly on behalf of UNICEF through I think it's about 25 radio stations in Somalia. And we're engaging 30 or 40,000 women in these conversations. We're engaging with people from the IDP, the internally displaced groups, as well as the nomadic, the rural, and the urban community. And it's all hard work to do that, but we think that it's quite important.
So difficult, very difficult work, sometimes tedious, but extremely important because you're bringing to the table voices of people who might otherwise be very marginalized. I'd like to turn over to the audience for people who might have some questions for Lord Kearns.
Tell us where we're wrong.
Yes.
Thank you, Lord Kearns. Destalaka again from MAMREF. I have a question for you, and I've heard actually the earlier panel and you also referring to the vital voices that we need to listen to as foundations, as philanthropists, etc. My question is, and something that I haven't heard, is the voice of the youth. Have you considered that? I know that in the last year we've been engaging with youth, and the big thing that they came out with is nothing for us, about us, without us. But I realize I haven't heard that from you, and I'd be interested in your comments on that.
Thank you. Question on youth voices, and we'll take another one in the middle, and then come to the front.
Thank you. My name is Mandela Yacent. My question is, as you are saying, when we hear about philanthropy, we hear about money. That's the first thing that comes in our mind. So my question is...
A little louder, so speak into the mic so he can hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Repeat the question kindly, thanks.
I'm a very deaf old man.
Okay, so my question is it necessary to have money to be a philanthropist? I mean, can also in-kind donations be considered as philanthropist activities? I have kind of a follow-up question. It is going to be the same question as hers, but what strategies for, to involve young Africans in philanthropic activities? You know, we sometimes find ourselves in activities like political activities, but what are opportunities that we have as young Africans to find ourselves in philanthropic activities? Thank you.
Patrick Worms, Royal Agroforestry Centre. I'm fascinated by this idea that you can do statistical analysis on what people are telling you in a language you don't understand, in order not only to understand what they say, but what they mean, and therefore understand, for example, that the Turkana might say, yes, I'd like a latrine, when in practical terms he'll never use it. I wonder if you've tested that. How do you test that the work that you do through that statistical analysis actually manages to work in practice?
Coming back to the voices and youth, we're doing a certain amount of work with various organizations on youth, but it tends to be youth in, well, probably the three big ones we're dealing with at the moment. One is through with the Well-Told Story, curating, which they're very good at, but they can't analyze. We can. The words that people use in Sheng, which is a moving language which has no written form, to which of the words, in this in particular case we're dealing with HIV/AIDS population control and the behavior of young men and women with each other in that 15 to 25-year-old age group, of which there are probably 200,000 we're regularly in touch with, as to which of the words and which of the combinations of words that and I partly come on to the second question, you can, through the algorithms, work out which are the key words which are creating the most buzz. And it's only at that stage you actually bother to find out what the words mean. So you go at it from that end. We're working, secondly, with doing a lot of work with the Irish Trochara on the attitudes of young girls between the age of 12 and the ending of secondary school as to the reasons why and why not, what it is that is driving them to stay in school and not to stay in school. We've got quite an interesting one which is going on at the moment where I don't know the answers, which is a survey on the relationship between young girls at that stage and their fathers, and who becomes, in many ways, with them, and that relationship is the key, seems to be the key determinant as to which course and who makes the choice, but on the next stage of their development and career. I don't know what the answers will be, but it will come out and it'll be on national radio when we've completed the exercise. But I think it's quite an interesting way of and it may be that relationship isn't as important as we think it is, and we'll be able to go back later and find out. But those are, if you like, some of the ways that we're working with youth. It's more about what youth are doing rather than, although to some extent, in each case, it is how the youth is thinking about that. That's talking about very young people. It's not dealing with, if you like, I don't know, let's call them the 20 to 40-year-olds. And I don't think that we have done much work outside Somalia. We've done a bit, where some of the issues, some of the health issues become quite important. Their ability to take drugs, the preventative medicine, on which we have quite a lot of information. Question on, do we know whether we're right? And the answer is we don't. But we think we're more likely to be right than not doing it. And it is quite a difficult area, because in some of the dialects we're dealing with, men and women will give the same answer but mean different things. I mean, in Luo, for instance, when a man says yes, he means yes. And if a woman says yes, she means she doesn't really know. And, you know, it gets quite difficult. All we can do in most of the operations that we are working with, we are triangulating that by following up with a limited number of conversations to the people who, with permission, are prepared to talk to us in rather more detail about the particular issues. So we can do that. We can also use people who are so clever at linguistics at Cambridge that they can derive some analysis out of the expressions that they tell me gives them a chance to show enthusiasm or lack of it with the answer that they've given. But I don't think we'll ever know the answer. And by the way, we're not really very good, because we're talking to the people who have an access to a mobile phone. We think it's the best we can do, but it doesn't, and it tends to mean that in most cases the number of our respondents are men, in some cases not by a great amount, but in other cases by quite a large amount. So our results are skewed from a perfect, perfect, and this isn't sampling. This is more than sampling. Now there was a question which I half understood.
On young people being involved in philanthropy, and is it always about having a certain amount of money? Can you be a philanthropist without being wealthy, per se?
Gee, I mean, the answer has to be yes. I mean, we all are in our various ways, whether it's within the family, within the local community, or however. We can all be philanthropists. We don't have to have money. We can volunteer. We can volunteer in the home. We can volunteer in the local community. We can, as I don't know how they do it, and certainly in my street in London, we all go out once or twice a year and clean our streets. That seems to be part of that whole enterprise, and I'm sure we could all do more, but I think there are plenty of opportunities to be involved. It doesn't need money, although with money, clearly money gives you a wider range of choice as to what you do.
Yeah, and I think, Mohsen had mentioned the report, the toolkit produced by the African Philanthropy Forum. In there's some clarifications in terms of how you distinguish from charity to philanthropy, giving someone food today versus maybe figuring out ways that someone can be more sustainably self-sufficient. So the question of sustainability, addressing root causes, causing transformational changes that will necessitate or stabilize situations where the problem at heart can be resolved over time, I think is one of the things that might distinguish philanthropy from a day-to-day charity, which is intrinsic in many of our own African cultures. Wherever you are, whether it's Harambee in Kenya or wherever else, it is part and parcel of being an African is being charitable and philanthropic. More questions. We had a few more hands. Yes, the lady over there, and then Kennedy. Microphones. The mics, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Julie. I'm from Kenya. I'm from the African Association for Public Administration and Management. And it's good to meet you, Lord Simon Carnes. I think it's a common perception for me, and I think most of the people I know, that philanthropists really didn't like being seen in the public eye. So we never used to know who are the people behind the initiatives. So it's good that at least now we've been able to see them and demystify that they're actual people and not just money, not just ATMs splashing money. On to my question. I just wanted to know a little bit about the checks and balances that are in this philanthropic organization in light of the recent scandal that we've just seen with other organizations that they are infringing on human rights and really doing more harm than doing good. So maybe you can comment on that. And also tell us a little bit about philanthropy in political spheres. Like, is it something that can be allowed to do? Like, now that you're trying to do good, can you now back a political cause or a political party to take over leadership? Is that all? Because sometimes they hear like people are projects of philanthropists, that they are backed by this philanthropist so that they can change a regime in a country. So maybe you can comment a little bit about that. Thank you.
Very interesting question. So the question of anonymity behind charity and giving, the question of institutions that have questionable reputations now. I think I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I'm thinking maybe Oxfam comes to mind. No, all right. And how, you know, those current reputational issues can affect their impact. And then the last question, what was the last one again? Political engagement. So, you know, what's influencing the political situation? Is there a political agenda sometimes in the allocation of resources to pursue specific interests? Yes.
Lord Keynes, my question is also linked to the last part of your question on politics. If you are listening to what communities are saying to you so that you can then generate the solutions or co-create solutions, how do you filter the political voice? You know, if I give you an example of my country right now, we're just about to go for elections, and the politician is coming with the T-shirt, with the rice, with the sugar, and then with a lot of promises. How do you then filter that as an influence of what the community might then tell you is what they need, and yet it could just be that it's a political influence because of the election season?
Very interesting. So the question of patronage systems, how political leaders may sometimes manipulate their stakeholders, potential voters, with various incentives. So how do you filter for that? How do you not skew the data? Yeah.
Well, as far as the data is concerned, I mean, we are entirely neutral. I mean, we can agree at an outset whether we will or won't feel sufficient sympathy with the organization and its objectives, but beyond that, that's where we make a choice. Beyond that, we're just number crunchers. We just find things out. We find out what people want, what people say. We will interpret that data in a way that is useful for our partners, and we will work, I'm sure, in the course of this with our partners to find out what they think is important. But we're just a research organization, so
to push back on that a little bit, I mean,
Yeah.
have you said no to a certain partner or stakeholder because, or someone who you might work with because maybe what their mission or mandate or priorities are misaligned, or maybe had to break a partnership because you discovered something that wasn't disclosed initially?
I think the only times when we've done that has tended to be when it has become apparent to us that the partner or client that we have doesn't wish to use the information for the reasons that they engaged us, but because they have a political agenda, and it is useful to use some part of the information we have for their own political purposes, which at another level they could have their own political opinions, but we don't want the skewing of the data that we provided to provide the basis for those opinions. Coming back to what was the...
There was a question on anonymity in terms of removing the veil from the people who are the benefactors of various philanthropic initiatives to create more transparency. How important is that?
We've tended to work with organizations that are quite large, and they are well-known NGOs or government departments. We're looking to work at the moment with one or two counties in Kenya. And to that extent, we know who they, and it is obvious who they are. I think our sense is that most of the organizations we work widely with are funded by a wide range of different people. We ourselves, and by the way, we're very close to being bust because people will happily pay for our service, but they won't pay for the bread and butter of keeping the thing going. But we're funded in fair measure by the Hewlett Foundation, who and two other small charities. And we will certainly take account of what Hewlett particularly want to see done, and I think that's entirely appropriate. I don't think we go around shouting that Hewlett has asked us to do this or that, because the sort of constraints they put on us are not of that order. Beyond that, I think we rely on the definition of charity that we work within. And we are, I hope, confident that other people who we are working for and who might one day even fund us, have similar backgrounds. They do not tend to be individuals. Although, if somebody came along with a large fat check without too many conditions, I'd engage in conversation with them. But I think we'd want to feel, and we have a very small. We have one person from the World Bank, one person who used to be the chief of the British Council, and about three others. They're people who are not going to allow us to get very far off the line. Do other organizations? You'll probably know better than I.
All right. Any last questions? Yes, gentleman at the back.
Thank you. My name is Ivan. I work for a non-profit called Give Directly here in Kigali. We give cash grants to extremely poor families to get them out of poverty. And we use a lot of evidence to kind of inform, how we program our interventions. My question to you is on data protection. Like, what mechanisms, codified protocols have you put in place to protect information for probably the recipients you're dealing with who are participating in your programs? The second question is, how much of your work is built on the already existing evidence base that's informing some of the work that has been done in our industry.
Okay, so data protection and how much data, existing data, do you already use as opposed to the data your team goes out to generate?
We certainly worry a great deal about data protection, and indeed we wipe it clear very, very quickly after we have produced the mass of data. I mean, I think Facebook is the one area that I think is going to change in the fairly near future, but there is a lot of data that is publicly available, and once it's publicly available, then there's very little we can do about it, and occasionally we can find it quite useful to use it. But beyond that, we work within existing data protection laws, which indeed themselves are now changing as we speak. And to the extent that we have data, it is scrubbed pretty quickly after we used it. So individual data is not usable. Clearly, if people are talking on the radio and they use their name, it's in the public domain, and there's nothing we can do about that. Our partners, our clients, may use existing, to answer your other question, may be influenced by their previous experience. We don't have any of that. We just create, analyze, we hope rather well, data. I mean, we're very simple people.
Lord Cairns, I'd like to thank you very much for some of your insights centered around this question of creating transparency of information, generating data and opinions that are critical to informing the actions, the work that philanthropists and their partners might do to advance specific objectives, whether they be related to the SDGs or other targets. Thank you very much for sharing your anecdotes, your insights. I'd also like to thank the team from APF for what they have done to organize this event. Mohsen, Tutu, Sarah, Stephen, yes, everybody, the whole crew. And I'll pass the microphone to her so she can offer some closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Louder! Thank you. Thank you to Eddie. Thank you to Lord Simon. I think it's been an interesting morning/afternoon. And thank you for staying on till the end. Give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you so much. I'll just say a quick few words as we wrap up. We're really done for the day. First, again, on behalf of the board and staff of the APF, I would really like to thank you for making this. Some of the guests here actually came for the Mo Ibrahim weekend, but some specifically came for this program. So thank you for those who made the time from the weekend to be here, and those who came all the way from wherever it is you traveled from just to attend the event. We're really grateful. Unfortunately, our board chair could not make it. We're really looking forward to having her, Mrs. Sisi Masiyiwa. She's the one of the co-founders and the co-founder of the Higher Life Foundation, which Dr. Kennedy represented on the board, but she's just an amazing, incredible woman who, along with her husband, who are doing amazing work on the continent. And she's done great leading APF in its new state, because we're newly independent, if I'll put it that way. We were initially incubated by the Global Philanthropy Forum, and now we're an independent entity run by Africans for Africa, and she's just the perfect person to take us at this point in time. So I just want to acknowledge Mrs. Sisi Masiyiwa and the amazing work she and the board are doing at the African Philanthropy Forum. I would like to say a big thank you to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. I don't think there is anyone from the foundation in this room right now because they have a lot going on, but it is amazing. Of course, we have Lord Simon, who recently left the board of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, but I don't think you've truly left. I think once you're in the foundation, you're a member of the foundation. So thank you. I think I've been in this space for several years, and it's always a pleasure and it's always heartwarming to see donors and philanthropists that put their weight behind nonprofit organizations. I'm not sure if you were there on Friday evening at the award ceremony. Dr. Ibrahim specifically listed all the organizations that are having side events here, and we're one of those organizations. It's important to note that we just showed up. The hall, the cameraman, the video, everything has been handled by Mo Ibrahim Foundation. So we just packed our bags and brought our notebooks. So let's give a round of applause to Mo Ibrahim Foundation for the amazing, amazing work that they're doing. I would also like to thank the Higher Life Foundation. They are our funders at the APF, and they've contributed significantly to the work that we're doing across the continent. I would like to thank Seagull Foundation. Dido is there. Please stand up for recognition. They're quite shy at Seagull Foundation. Now we have Liliane. Fantastic. So they've been so helpful. They've been with the APF even before I got on board. So that's just fantastic. And I think it's a testament to the interest and the hunger for supporting philanthropic activity on the continent, and the fact that we're just a few years old and we've been able to work across the continent. We have local partners, and when I say local, that's Africa. I tell people now, I don't see myself as a Nigerian, I see myself as an African first everywhere I am. So when I write local, I'm not writing Nigeria, I mean Africa. So it's amazing that we have this huge support from across the continent and also internationally. I would like to thank our speakers, Ambassador Georgis, who is still here. Thank you for staying on. Rita Roy, she had to run away. Well, not run away, she had to run to some other engagements. Dr. Kennedy, whom we've acknowledged as part of the Higher Life team. We have Nyokabi Kenyatta, thank you so much for staying on. Lord Simon, thank you. And I think it's important to also note that some of the speakers came on board super last minute. We had cancellations, and we just looked at those that had signed up, and we read their bios and figured, oh, we would love to hear from this speaker or this delegate. Ambassador is one of them. I think I had my first conversation with Lord Simon yesterday morning, just before breakfast. So and the quality of conversation is really important when we have meetings like this. And I think it's important that even though they came on board at short notice, they were able to contribute significantly to our conversation. Thank you very much. And to our moderator, Sarah, again, she had to catch a flight and she's left. An amazing Eddie, thank you so much for spending time to call and to follow up with all the speakers before we got here. We're very, very grateful. I would like to acknowledge our team. Sarah is at the back. Sarah, please stand up for recognition. Toby, the one behind social media. By the way, we're trending. Did you know that? Please give APF a round of applause. Thank you. But keep it going. Don't stop tweeting when you leave here. Let's keep the conversation going. And someone who is not here, her name is Tutu Balogun. Some of you might have received emails from her, especially the speakers. We're just a team of 3 that came from Lagos, but I would like to acknowledge Tutu in absentia. Thank you so much to our volunteers, our Mo Ibrahim Foundation volunteers. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you for your time. And everyone, our friends, I see Heather in the crowd from End Fund. I see Jackie Chimanzi from Africa Leadership Institute, and everyone that has made this an amazing occasion for us. We appreciate your support, and we're counting on your support. We've taken away quite a bit from these conversations, and I think it's important, given our role in bringing philanthropists together and engaging them in conversations on how they can do more and do better. We will take what we have learned and engage them better going forward. And please join us at our regional meetings. If you're in Maputo, if you're in Accra, if you're in Cairo, if you're in Douala, join us. And you cannot afford to miss the annual conference in Johannesburg. Please save the date, August 1st and 2nd. Thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.